Welcome to the Clearing the Air podcast. My name is Amy. Clearing the Air is a branch of Rethinking Climate and opens conversations about complex and overlooked climate issues to make them more personal and accessible. We trust experts from a global network to bring different perspectives to our learning journey to show that there is a space for everyone in the climate movement. Today I will be speaking to Sam Chevallier. Sam is part of a company called ReWild Africa, which focuses on the principles of ecology, rewilding, and biomimicry. Welcome, Sam, to the Clearing the Air podcast.
Thanks for having me.
First thing I wanted to ask is just if you could give an introduction to the work you do at ReWild Africa and how it links to the ideas of kind of biomimicry and regeneration.
Cool. Well, yeah, I think I'll just give a little brief, just a brief summary of ReWild Africa. But firstly, thank you so much for having me on this call. It's very cool to just be a part of something like this. I think it's so needed in the world. So thank you so much for having ReWild Africa a part of that. I think it's best, like, maybe just start with where ReWild comes from. Like, what is the concept? And rewilding is obviously, it's very simply put, you can either rewild your psychology or you can rewild the landscape. And I think you can't really rewild the landscape unless you understand psychologically why you would want to rewild the landscape. And I think you can't. The point of that is you can't really work from the outside in. You need to work from the inside out. And that's very much been my journey over the last 10 years. So I did an undergrad in environmental development at Stellenbosch, and then I did an honours in sustainable development at the Sustainability Institute, where I was exposed to the state of the planet, the impacts of climate change on Africa. I was learning things like complexity theory, systems thinking, ecological design, sustainable cities, renewable energy finance, just kind of exposed to the whole world of what sustainability meant. It was quite a rude awakening for me as a 22-year-old, college student going straight into like what's going on in the world. And then I realized that this is where biomimicry kind of came in, which was I needed to connect with nature. Before I could really talk about nature, like how can we really actually be like an ecologist or be someone that talks about nature a lot but doesn't actually understand it, or through an experience like the name of a plant, and rather than just the name, just the being with a plant, or an animal, understanding how they live, what is their social structure, what do they need, what are their fundamental needs. I only know my fundamental needs. So going back to that point was like rewilding the self is really much about saying, like, I'm not, like, psychologically, I'm not the only one on this planet. And therefore, like, how do I grow empathy for the world around me? Understanding how animals interact with this planet too. And when we begin to understand them, we can really, truly conserve. And so that's where a lot of my energy in understanding ecosystems came. And just being a game ranger for a couple of years, and then going on to do a master's in ecological design thinking, which was very much about how do we, if you break down ecological design thinking, it's like, what is ecology, what is design, and what is thinking? And ecology is obviously the interrelationships of nature. Design is everything you touch, everything you see is design, from the home that you're living in, to the table that you're sitting at. Everything has thought behind its shape, And design is also fluid. It's like how you open a door properly. Have you ever been to a door that just it's not a very intuitive door? Like, design is like the touch points of our lives. It's everywhere. And of course, the thinking is very much like the thought processes that have built us into a way of seeing in the world. Such as Descartes said, he's a philosopher. He said, "I think, therefore I am, therefore I'm separate from nature." And that gave us a very mechanical worldview of the world, and that was like the start of us beginning to see ourselves as separate from the natural world, and nature actually being like mechanical, like almost like clockwork. Like you can open up a frog and learn the mechanics of a frog like clockwork, and we'd lost that connection to the relationship with the natural world, which we often find in indigenous wisdom. So this is very kind of just like this very formative learning, I guess, into this introduction of me and what rewilding is. Of course, the more physical side of rewilding is actually bringing ecosystems back, biodiversity back, and you can do that through many different ways. Of course, from an African perspective, we can go into later how do we do that, and you know, how do we bring a Cape leopard back into the mountains because it brings more biodiversity through the trophic cascade. But we've seen Africa has been influenced hugely by colonial thought. So how do we deconstruct that and then construct something new that is going to be conducive for both communities and nature? So sorry, Amy, that was a very long-winded introduction.
You touched on quite a few key points I wanted to bring in, because I feel like so much of our society is built on the opposite of wildness. It's all about control and systems which we can predict. Like even when you think about how we generally garden, farm, it's like very neat rows, which is the opposite of how plants grow wild. And how do you think we as individuals or as a population can get that sort of mental shift into like accepting wildness back? Because it seems like there's something in us that we're so scared of that wildness.
Yeah, I think, it's an interesting one. I definitely with rewilding, I'm not promoting that we get back to a society where, leopards and lions are walking down our main streets, and our children aren't safe. Like that is not the essence of rewilding. I think it's in essence, wildness is what creates the fabric for our existence. It's in part and parcel of the world that we experience in terms of a regulatory planet. Like we can't exist without biodiversity. If you've read any of Harari's books, he says like the three biggest threats that we're facing is nuclear warfare, 2, ecological loss, and 3, technological disruption. And ecological loss is really bad because if we take away the biodiversity, then we're taking away the regulatory feedback that creates the temperature that we know outside. It's like your body is regulating at 36 degrees Celsius. When we change that, when we change the state of the environment by taking away the biomass, we are creating the dynamic equilibrium changes and temperature can change, etc. So biodiversity is crucial for our living. Everything's living on Earth. So wildness, to answer your question, is really about realizing that our relationship to nature is one that must be respected because it's what gives us life. It's what gives our children life, more than just like loving animals and going to a game park. We should respect it beyond that because clean air is good to breathe and clean water is good to drink. So wildness is much more than just bringing back those big species. It's about protecting the landscape and having a common environmental ethic for these. And that's something that you like scientifically you can bring in. Like I believe in science, but it's also very social, which is something that I don't know if I answered your question correctly at the beginning of like who ReWild is. ReWild is more than just we're a company that has a team of now 7, and we have a very strong social engagement in how we treat each other, how we work with our clients, and how we build that sense of community behind a mission that we're trying to foster. So it's not so it's also so much about the culture that you're breeding in wildness, in community, that really brings in this social aspect of rewilding.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of the idea of becoming closer to nature is a lot about empathy and humility almost, and acknowledging that these beings who we may not be able to communicate with as easily still have value and still have their own wisdom and intelligence. And you mentioned the colonial mindset. And I feel like a lack of empathy is also what leads to so many social and political and economic issues that we have in this world. And I love the idea of finding a solution that is better for the environment and an ecological solution, but that also would hopefully help with so many social issues we have in this world.
Yeah, so if we can find, like, it's been a lot of as I said, I think earlier before the call, was deconstructing my own worldview or deconstructing my own understanding of what conservation is in Africa, because everything is context specific. If you learn about systems thinking or you learn about biomimicry, which is learning from nature, the reason why particular plants grow in particular areas is based on its context. Nothing, no other reason wouldn't exist there. So a solution has to manifest from its context. It can't come from an adopted place. And we've been doing that from the African perspective. We've been taking a lot of kind of colonial kind of perspectives or westernized thinking into the way in which we conserve land and regenerate land. And so I'm still very much in that learning process of what does it mean to decolonize conservation? What does that actually mean? How do we understand the protection of landscape away from the examples of, say, Yellowstone National Park in America, which is a very keystone type of conservation area? So I think that's a really strong question that all of us should be asking from the African continent. And how do we bring the communities that lived within those ecosystems already and not send them to the peripheries just because we need to conserve this particular landscape? We need to create a conservation model that integrates that that level of complexity and creates an economy around it. And there's definitely an economy around this. We need to start thinking from a regenerative perspective. When we start to bring wildlife back and regenerative agriculture back, like, what sort of new economy might that bring? And I mean, I've got a few like thoughts on where it could go, but I think that a big part of that is realizing that we actually can't go in the way that we're going at the moment, because climate change, the science is there. If for some reason science is not changing people, the media is also trying. We've had the inconvenient truth. We've had all these things that try and convince us that this is an important thing to understand, but science and media just doesn't seem to be working specifically. I mean, of course, it's a holistic perspective on change. And so we should still be trying in media and in science to communicate the importance of this. But I think, what does scare me sometimes is that we only become innovative when crisis occurs. And we saw that with the water shortage here in Cape Town. And the most vulnerable are going to be the most impacted. It's not going to be, for example, me, who's very privileged here in Cape Town to have access to the resources. It's people in rural areas that are going to be most affected. Their schools are going to be really hot. Their land is not going to be able to be fertile and produce a lot of crops, because it's going to be too hot. There's going to be a lot of drought. And so, yeah, it's a really big question. Is how do we begin to collectively understand the context that we're in and solve for this problem?
And it is such an issue at the moment that wild places as they currently exist, because they're often game reserves, nature reserves, they are not equally accessible to different people. And I think people living in poverty are often blamed for environmental issues because their litter is more visible and they don't have options of how they consume. You need to get people to engage with nature and have a relationship with nature in order to care about it. You can't assume that people who don't know where their next meal will come from will care about animals reaching extinction. And all of these sort of nature reserves are either far away or extremely expensive to get to. And it seems so unfair that these places that should be communal areas of wildness are sort of so closed off. How do we get people to interact with wildness, or how do we increase the accessibility of nature and wild places?
I think the biggest thing is that we can't expect people that are living in poverty to care. They're just trying to get food on the table for their kids. So it's exceptionally hard problem. It's an exceptionally hard problem, and it's a wicked problem. It's like very difficult to break down, a straightforward answer to this. But with a complex problem such as that, we need to approach it in a way that is realizing and having empathy for those individuals and realize where we can make change at this point. At this point, how do we just create more action in these various spaces that can have it like start impacting their lives? So how do we help communities how do we help people, at least in urban areas, understand what's happening in rural areas? How do we educate people there? But also, how do we create an educational system that is making the young people of today mindful of what future they're going to walk into? Education at the moment is not equipping our youth to deal with the problems that the future are going to bring. They are going to have to deal with a lot of the issues. And I think some of the things that we can do is literally change policy. We need to change from the top down. We need to speak to people that people just get people closer to the grassroots, the impact on grassroots. So how do we get the Minister of Education in Cape Town to realize this problem and say, we need to get climate change curriculum in schools tomorrow, right now. There's no time to waste. We need to bring in this level of education so that they become equipped with the learning material that's going to help them solve this problem. The quicker we can bring them into understanding the problem, the quicker they will learn how to find a solution. So that's a big thing. Youth and education is just unbelievably important. Regenerative agriculture. How do we begin to bring new practices, localized practices, transport, ways in which we can the amounts of carbon in the atmosphere, but also realize that the soil is life, soil is life. And how do we realize that we need to create regenerative practices that are rehabilitating the soil as we grow, rather than the other way around, which is being very kind of heat, beat, and treat everything, And biomimicry, is a tool that we can use within these different paradigms to ask, how do we not just learn about nature, but learn from it and apply these tried and tested solutions to our everyday life. Whether you're an engineer, an architect, someone working in sociology, there's things that we can learn about organizational structure, processes and systems and designs that we can apply to these complex issues that we face within all these different themes. And I think we need strong communication that is bringing the public into a deep sense of awareness of the issue that we face. And in terms of rural areas, it's just so difficult. And if we can create some level of access for them to have, just mitigate the problem for them in some way, we must. And at this point, I'm still learning and thinking and wondering and questioning how do we have a holistic solution to a very, very complex problem.
And I think what seems even more sinister to me is that people, maybe more like us, who live with immense amounts of privilege, especially in a country like South Africa, can still acknowledge that climate change is an issue, but not necessarily change their habits to reflect that. I know Jonathan Safran speaks about this idea of climate agnostics in one of his books, where people intellectually accept that it's an issue and say that they think that it is a crisis, but are not doing anything to change that. And so it is an issue of how do you get to people's hearts and make them acknowledge that it is an issue that they have to face and that they have to do something about. And do you think that you use the medium of film quite a bit? Do you find that film helps in that way to maybe visualize a problem that can otherwise be quite abstract, or that people don't realize they are contributing to?
Yes. So, within ReWild, our main form of business is film and storytelling. We actually call it storytelling more than film, because much like Harari speaks in *Sapiens* and Homo Deus, and we are governed by narrative, and the way in which we see the world is through narrative. Stories. We've been since sitting around a fire hundreds of years ago. We saw the world, the stars, gods, religion as stories. Like everything is a story, and so we believe that through narrative, strong storytelling, that we might be able to connect to the heart center of people, and through visual storytelling, really engage people with a problem or a solution, and hopefully both in the same film. But also just to build deep empathy for a potential character that might be facing something that we as people, you're a little bit more privileged, aren't aware of. And maybe we could change one or two people's perspectives that makes them want to change, or to apply something new in their lives, or to grow a garden outside, or to create kind of behavioral change. Like, how can they start actually watching their own behaviors? Which is a great friend of mine, David Peretz, has a company called Circles of Time, and he works very much with behavioral psychology and how we can work with ourselves to help us become better. I can't recommend a better person or thing to try and do is just work on your own behaviors. They're very hard. Behaviors are one of the hardest things to actually change. We saw that with the water crisis. Think about the last shower that you had in Cape Town. Do you have a bucket underneath you still? Are you showering for longer than 2 minutes? Like the majority of us probably are. We revert back to how we were, and therefore we need to place systems. And this is what's really important. In order for us to change, if we build a system that we are then governed by, then we will begin to adopt it. We will begin to adopt it easier. Face masks is also another behavioral thing, where face masks we're using during COVID now, and we will do it as much as we can to protect our friends and family. But as the virus finds, we find our way through this virus, we're going to drop the face mask, and we probably won't need it as much. But it's not like something that we've implemented that needs to stick with us. We need to think about ways, here where we can adopt new systems and new ways of thinking to the way in which we live that is more regenerative. So I guess just to leave people with asking that question, like what practices could you do in your day that actually is regenerative? And I don't mean that as just a physical thing as well. I mean, physically you could work in a garden that gives you the soil around you much better and grows space for flowers that butterflies come to or birds come to. Like, that's a very practical action thing that you can do with your garden, with your food and your local food source. But we also need people to be healthy. So how can you regenerate and rewild and connect with nature more? Be outside more. COVID has also forced us to be inside a lot lately. So I think from what we could do from our perspective here in Cape Town is really just, I really encourage people to look at their own systems around them and see how they could to create more regenerative practices and build more community that encourages your behavior change, that asks you might have friends. I think even you were saying that in starting this podcast, you started with 2 other people. Could you have done this without them? You know what I mean? So, and it's amazing, and that's why we've got to build that level and sense of community and bring people in and stop excluding people from that process. Yeah, we need to open up our hearts and film, going back full circle of what film does is try to engage people with that sense of empathy that that sense of EQ and empathy that we need and move away from apathy. But obviously, we want them to watch a film and want to create the change, and whatever that is, it's different per film, of course, and whoever our clients are.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier this idea of moving from theory to action. And so maybe just to end off, like, what actions do you think are most important through the work you do, through running an environmentally friendly business? What actions are important to move towards more regenerative way of thinking in order to help the environment?
Firstly, whoever's listening to this, I would ask them, like, do you think you're a critical thinker? And if not, what does it mean to be critical? I guess a critical thing is, have you ever had someone that gives you very intense feedback? You know, that is, you must be so grateful to that person because they're actually wanting you to be better, a better version of yourself. I mean, sometimes it can be malicious, I'm sure, don't get me wrong, but in terms of feedback, in terms of people helping you become better, like, do you have a sense of critical thinking? Do you accept everything that you are given, whether it's education or it's what you eat, your food systems, like, just where is your food coming from? To be more regenerative, to have a much bigger impact, ask that very question. Where did your salad come from? If you eat meat, where did your meat come from? How was your meat actually looked after? What did they put inside that meat in terms of hormones, or how was it treated? That's one thing, just to be critical thinking. Secondly, I'd really, really ask people to work together to build an environmental ethic, and that building an environmental ethic, I think, is you can do individually by just understanding your local context. The action behind that is knowing your local species that live around your home, the birds. You don't even have to know their names. You don't have to know the name of the sunbird, but you could just watch that sunbird drink from a particular plant and know that that plant is in relationship to that bird, not just a plant sitting on its own. We need to see the world more as this, like, an interconnected world of relationships, and that you yourself are in relationship to the world. That action is also just as big. Realizing that you are connected to this planet. At this point, we don't know how many other Earths there are in space, but this is all we know of at this point, and we need to value what we live in and not spoil the nest. So that's potentially a second thing, and then a third thing is, like, whatever paradigm you're in, whatever sector, whatever you're studying, I encourage you to maybe realize what it is that you could do for the climate, or you could do for ecological systems in that space, whether it's architecture or it's engineering. Ask yourself, can I contribute to a more thrivable planet in my paradigm? And if so, how? Ask yourself that. And that will give us, that's just at least where we could start. And if you can build community. If you have a question of something, create a WhatsApp group with 5 people and say, let's just share stories on climate justice, or social climate justice, and just share that. That's an action. That's already starting with a community of people that are engaged with a problem. There's a lot more people than yourself that are interested in solving a problem, and we will only solve this together.
I think it's great, though, because this kind of thinking change is very realistic around what the issues are and acknowledging that they are massive issues, but they are also a way of giving people hope and practical ways of being able to contribute to changing the world. And I think that's a good balance to keep, is being pragmatic and acknowledging the reality, but also acknowledging that we all play a part in how to change it and how to create climate change mitigation.
Yeah, no, we all have a role to play there. I guess that my only last thing would be, where if you're a student and you are coming out of university and you're questioning what sort of career you're looking to go into, or if I'm speaking to a person like that, I'd really also ask the question of, like, what is the culture of the work that you're walking into? Because your first thing that you do defines, like a good start in your career. And if you can connect with connect with a company or connect with an NGO or whatever it is that has a strong culture of people and how they connect with people and how they, for example, with ReWild, we do like these lunches on a Monday that we do together on a circle table, and we connect with one another. So I really encourage young people to stand up and also have a voice, and not just be in the background and watch these politicians and etc. just speak. I think the youth need to have more of a voice and just be bold and courageous. I just really wanted to say that. I really did. And yeah, it's time for the youth to stand up wherever they can, because it's their future. Obviously, people must let go of power where they can and create space for the new. Thank you so much for having me. It has been really such a privilege. If you want to learn more about biomimicry, and one of the other businesses that's ReWild Africa is also in relationship with in terms of building the business is called Learn Biomimicry, and you can study basically biomimicry online, introductory course and a life principles course and a systems thinking course. So I really encourage you, if you want to engage with biomimicry, check it out. It's learnbiomimicry.com. And yeah, if you're keen to see any of our films, rewildafrica.org. Love to get your feedback on it. But otherwise, thank you so much, Amy. It's just been brilliant.
Thank you, Sam.
You are listening to the Clearing the Air podcast. I am Amy, and you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Please don't forget to click the like button and subscribe to the channel.